Hello everyone, my name is Mac and welcome back to another episode of Highlights from the Permanent Collection. This week, to continue our sub-series of public art here at Lamar University, we'll be discussing an artist who continues to beautify our Southeast Texas community. He's a well-loved Beaumont sculptor who works in a variety of mediums and is known for his portrait and other figurative work. This week is David Cargill. I would like to take this moment to thank the Art Museum of Southeast Texas for their assistance with photos and to recognize that much of this week's research comes from the Texas Monthly article by Seth Bowe that was created in conjunction with our pre-pandemic 2020 exhibition titled Life is a Long Way, featuring a retrospective of Mr. Cargill's work. David Cargill was born in Huntsville, Texas in 1929. At only 6 years old, his family moved to Beaumont when his father's job as an electrical engineer at Gulf State Utilities was transferred. Cargill's family was not artistic, and there were hardly any working artists in Beaumont at the time. Making art became a way of simply passing time for David. After graduating high school in 1946, the artist enrolled at Rice University in Houston to study pre-med. But by the fall of 1948, he had changed career paths and began studying industrial design at the Pratt Institute at the advice of his uncle, a professor at New York University. His studies in industrial design allowed the artist to combine his love for making things with practical applications, and pursuing fine art as a serious career path had not crossed his mind. It was in New York where he met his wife, Patricia, otherwise known as Patty, who was an illustration major at Pratt. Cargill says if it wasn't for Patty, he would have never become an artist. After graduating from Pratt in 1951, the newly married Cargills returned to Beaumont, Texas. This time was big for David, as he and Patty both began leading classes at the Beaumont Art Museum, now known as the Art Museum of Southeast Texas, as well as having his first Southeast Texas art show and receiving his first commissions for portrait busts and murals. Soon after, David enrolled in a self-directed sculpture program at the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan, while Patty remained in Beaumont working as an artist and around town. After David received his MFA in 1955, the couple became pregnant with their first child, and Cargill commenced building his impressive home studio in Beaumont. Around this same time, David came to know a young Keith Carter, whose family lived in the same duplex as the Cargills. As a child, Keith would see Cargill working on sculptures in the garage and wander in, and over time, David would become a mentor to the budding photographer. The two developed a strong relationship centered around art that still remains to this day. Over the next 10 years, Cargill would have another daughter, become a professor at Lamar, and create some of his most recognizable work. He would eventually add a foundry to his studio, and his home is now filled to the brim with art by Patty and David throughout the years, countless books, and a rather rowdy standard poodle named Bosch, which serves as the latest companion of David, who has had many standard poodles named after painters in his life. Mr. Cargill was featured in a 1957 Life magazine, served on museum and art council boards, where he is known to advocate for artists like him who got their start outside of a traditional gallery setting, and received an American Institute of Architects award for his notable commissions at the St. Basil's Chapel at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. Mr. Cargill was also honored at the Lamar University Le Grand Ball this past season and is continued to be celebrated by our community and beyond. We encourage you to visit the Art Museum of Southeast Texas for their David Cargill show currently on display titled A Lighter Side. This exhibition features a wide selection of this artist's work from the museum and others' private collections, as well as his own collection, and will be available for viewing until September. Mr. Cargill, who just turned 92 this year, has become ingrained in the Southeast Texas art community's fabric, and of the area's landscape, too. His list of public art in the area is exponentially long, but here we will show a select few while I read David Cargill's artist statement featured in the Beaumont Art Museum catalog for his 1974 exhibition. I have a friend who says, quote, "It is difficult to release an artist from a person," end quote. This strikes me as profound. As I look around, I can think of each of us having an, quote, artist within, end quote. Doing this in my own family, I can see how barriers that surround the artist within maintain a constant pressure to prevent its escape into the open. I believe the release of the artist within depends on those barriers which any person chooses to believe exist. Once released, I think the person becomes a reflector of his environment. I do not subscribe to the idea that he expresses himself. Most of us as children are locked away from this experience forever by our parents, our schooling, and lack of learning. Others are later walled in by the needs and worldly desires thrust upon us. Only a few escape. I can see how my parents opened the first doors for me. My father, by apprenticing me to his vast knowledge of making things, and my mother by giving me the freedom to make things at any time or place. I learned to love work and found sculpture to be its ultimate challenge. I realized the periods of my best production have been the ones where I felt the fewest obstacles. I have the characteristic of waking up each day thinking everything is right with the world. There is much to be done, and I can do my share today. This helps me ignore the many barriers that exist for most people. It seems that life fights back every step of the way, but through no special effort of my own, I seem to come through okay. Perhaps I've exposed my artist as much as I have because of an involuntary urge to resist restrictions. As I mature, I find myself applying less force against the areas of restriction that do not relate to my art. Applying force is an effort of time. I resist much by ignoring the restriction. Most barriers are in our minds. By ignoring them, we can go around them. The dailiness of life is my worst enemy because it takes the most time, and sculpture needs lots of time. It does not surprise me that my work tends to reflect positive areas of life. I am surrounded by people I love, things I like, and work I enjoy. David Cargill, August 1974. There is so much more to be said about Mr. Cargill and his work, but we thank you for joining us for just a small look. We will see you next time for another episode of Highlights from the Permanent Collection. Thanks for joining us.